More countries now recognize the state of Palestine than ever before.
The Canadian government is moving ahead with the recognition of the state of Palestine.
The UK now has formally announced its recognition of a Palestinian state too.
Australia has formally recognised the state of Palestine.
This infuriates Israel and its closest ally, the United States. They didn't even show up to listen to the speeches, but they are in the clear minority. Canada, the UK, Australia, Portugal, France, Andorra, Belgium, Luxembourg, Monaco, San Marino, Malta, they're just the most recent countries to recognize Palestinian statehood. But they add to a growing group of now more than 150 countries who acknowledge Palestine, many of whom decided on this decades ago. That's more than 3/4 of the world in agreement.
This recognition of the state of Palestine is a defeat for Hamas, just like for all those who foment anti-Semitism, nurture anti-Zionist obsessions, and who want the destruction of the state of Israel.
Recognizing the state of Palestine, led by the Palestinian Authority, empowers those who seek peaceful coexistence and the end of Hamas.
But here's the difficult question. What does any of that accomplish when one half of the supposed two-state solution vows never to allow anything of the sort, and when the most powerful nation on earth appears willing to back that position indefinitely? The easiest way to imagine Palestinian statehood is to see it. This is one vision of what that might look like, what Israel controlled, and importantly, what it didn't control before the war in 1967, where it captured and then occupied both Gaza and the West Bank. When Palestinians speak of a future state based on pre-1967 borders, this is what they're talking about. And when world leaders spoke Monday of the need to recognize Palestinians in Gaza and the occupied West Bank as people of their own land, people of a sovereign Palestine,
the conflict must end. The two-state solution is the only path to the just and lasting peace that fulfills the rights of all our peoples.
The urgency, they say, is the distinct feeling that true Palestinian statehood has never been further away from reality than it is now.
I almost think of this as a kind of cryo-diplomacy. They're trying to freeze the diplomacy in place so things don't get even worse as the war rages on. That very all-important preservation of the two-state solution, because it's slipping away with every given day for both sides, really.
The vast majority of homes, buildings, roads in Gaza have been destroyed.
Anywhere between 80 to 90% of all the buildings in Gaza have been reduced to rubble. And then the humanitarian crisis that has unfolded, the displacement of people.
Most of its population of 2 million people have been displaced. More than 65,000 killed, according to Gaza's health ministry. And tight Israeli control over the distribution of food in the Strip has contributed to what the UN describes as a state of famine. The Israeli government, over time, and especially over the course of the war with Hamas in Gaza, it has hardened against the idea of a Palestinian state.
זה לא יהיה. לא תקום מדינה פלסטינית ממערב לירדן.
The current Israeli government and the broader Israeli sentiment is that a Palestinian state represents a threat to the survival of the Jewish state, the state of Israel.
You hear Netanyahu say, whoever harms us, we will harm. So the real fear is, rather than promoting peace, that it kicks off a new cycle, a retaliatory cycle, that Israel will feel pressured to respond in a way that's unfortunately going to sort of shift things closer to war, although they're at war, but intensifying that rather than to peace.
That possibility of Israel potentially feeling backed into a corner, it's already come true to an extent. Almost immediately after countries like Canada, Australia, and the UK began announcing in a coordinated way that they were adding their names to the growing list of countries formally recognizing Palestinian statehood, Israel's most right-leaning members of government began making the case for what they called immediate countermeasures. And on that, consider a plan whose stated goal is to bury any hope of a Palestinian state.
Israel continues to expand West Bank settlements, including a 12 square kilometer patch of land known as E1.
An Israeli plan that had been frozen for decades, but that's been since approved, is this development plan called E1 that would connect East Jerusalem under Israeli control with the Israeli settlement of Ma'ale Adumim. Critics see that as a real threat to a future Palestinian state because it potentially severs the most direct route between the northern and southern areas of the West Bank. Say you're a Palestinian traveling from Ramallah to Bethlehem, but maybe now have to travel around Israeli settlements to get there.
Settlements can be removed, but it's difficult, and their proliferation in the West Bank has created a situation where it's become increasingly difficult to identify how you would even draw a contiguous Palestinian state if the Palestinians accepted those boundaries.
So the question is, if the tide of global consensus is shifting in favor of Palestinian statehood, does Israel interpret that as somehow forcing its hand or as an opportunity to act?
For the far right, they just believe the world is intrinsically hostile to Jews and that the only way the Jewish people can survive is essentially by building a fortress around themselves.
The domestic politics play a serious role in Israel and all of Netanyahu's calculations because they've got a really narrow majority and he's got to pay attention to his right-wing coalition partners. They're going to be pressuring him to annex, to declare annexation of potentially a large portion of the West Bank, building more settlements to sort of split that territory that they're talking about as a future Palestinian state into kind of a Swiss cheese, but there'll be so many holes in it that it'll be impossible to have a proper Palestinian state.
To be clear, settling one's own people onto the occupied territory of another, that's a violation of international law. But Israel doesn't accept that, nor, it would appear, does it need to, for as long as it can count on the support of its strongest ally. Benjamin Netanyahu's position on recognizing Palestinian statehood is that it gives Hamas a great gift. This is also the clear message in a letter sent to the leaders of Australia, Canada, France, and the UK, saying their move to recognize Palestine shows that violence, not diplomacy, is the most expedient means for terrorist groups like Hamas to achieve their political aims. That letter was signed by a group of 25 Republicans, and it mirrors the perspective of Donald Trump himself.
As if to encourage continued conflict, some of this body is seeking to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state. The rewards would be too great for Hamas terrorists for their atrocities.
The United States support has been phenomenal. On the practical side, we are seeing billions and billions of dollars being spent here by the United States. The other part of it, though, which is just as important, is U.S. support, U.S. political support for Israel, especially internationally.
It's really difficult to know what Trump might do to try to convince some of these world leaders to change their minds.
There is a risk that Trump could retaliate against countries that are recognizing a Palestinian state. We've seen how he uses tariffs, other types of sanctions. That could happen.
Could, because there is a track record of Trump hitting back sideways, if that makes sense. Because remember, he imposed dramatically higher tariffs on Brazil than he did other countries, making special reference to the way that Brazil has treated former President Bolsonaro, and adding, due in part to Brazil's insidious attacks on free elections, we will charge Brazil a tariff of 50% on any and all Brazilian products sent to the United States. This cross-domain retaliation, responding to something but in a completely different arena, that's been part of Trump's playbook since day one. Remember the border issue with Canada, addressing an emergency, halting illegal immigration, stopping poisonous fentanyl. Trump argued these are national security issues. But there's actually an entire section in this White House fact sheet called Using Our Leverage, which would turn out in this case to be to charge Mexico and Canada a 25% tariff on all products coming into the United States and its ridiculous open borders. I'm not judging the use of leverage, I'm just showing you how it happens. Because one other reason to believe Trump is capable of doing it again on this issue is that he's already threatened to. Wow, Canada has just announced that it is backing statehood for Palestine. That will make it very hard for us to make a trade deal with them. Oh, Canada. Now, he's yet to act on that threat, and some of the experts we spoke to aren't sure that he will.
Well, Trump is transactional, so I don't think he's going to hold it against these nations.
I don't think you're going to see a rift between the United States and its European and Canadian allies.
But that's also not the only leverage Trump has.
So far, the Trump administration's retaliation has not been against those countries, but against the Palestinian Authority itself.
On the day France announced to the UN General Assembly that it would be formally recognizing Palestinian statehood, I mentioned at the start of all this that there were two notable absences: Israel and the United States. Both boycotted that event. But there was actually a third world leader missing from that room, and that was, arguably, the would-be man of the hour, the head of the Palestinian National Authority, Mahmoud Abbas. You see, just before this rally at the UN, this massive show of force and support for the state of Palestine, the US government revoked the visa of Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas, making it impossible for him to physically attend the UN General Assembly in New York City.
On Friday, the General Assembly voted to give President Abbas exceptional permission to participate this coming week remotely from Ramallah.
And it's worth pointing out, US leverage doesn't end there either, because even if every member of the UN General Assembly were to support Palestinian statehood, actual admission as a real voting member requires the approval of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. Each of those 5 has veto power. 4 of the 5 support Palestinian statehood, but 1 does not.
The United States will almost certainly veto any resolution that would recognize Palestine as a full member of the UN.
But here's the thing. All of this risks getting way ahead of ourselves, because it's entirely possible that despite this notional support for the state of Palestine, that very little actually changes in the short term, because Israel and the US are not on board, because together they have the military force and economic leverage to withstand what pressure the world has so far been willing to apply, because where is even the consensus between Palestinian leaders?
Who or what is going to rule Gaza? Who or what is going to guarantee security so Hamas doesn't resurge and to create circumstances where the Israelis can withdraw their forces? And who or what will engage in the galactic problems, challenges of reconstruction? None of these questions, 2 years moving toward the third, have been answered.
What are we, in fact, recognizing? There are no real territories. So, it's a lot of words. It's a lot of positioning. It adds pressure, but will it actually make a difference? That is probably unlikely.
So if little changes, maybe the question becomes, why did all these countries decide suddenly to recognize Palestinian statehood in the first place?
The European states that have taken this step, Canada, Australia, others, may see this as an opportunity to send a signal to the Palestinian people that you shouldn't give up. So it's not just virtue signaling, it's you should have faith that this is still possible and act accordingly. But it could influence how other countries react to Israel and their actions against the Palestinians. So I wouldn't say that it's completely symbolic.
It's very important for the Palestinians, for us. We not only do we appreciate it after such a long time, but it also demonstrates a shift.
Now it's very late, but something is better than nothing.
And it's possible for now that's enough for the countries involved. But they also know time is not on the state of Palestine's side, if such a thing does come to formally exist, because every day the war goes on without a peace deal or even a ceasefire, whatever a state of Palestine might look like, there's less and less of it left.